Hey everyone. Okay, so we're going to be going over review for basic ECG or EKG. I totally stole a lot of the pictures off this from Understanding ECGs by Kathleen Schultz. This isn't for any, monetary gain. It's just a review for my semester 4 students at CCRI. All right, so we're going to look at the basic approach to interpretation of ECG strips. Now, remember, this is a review. This material was presented in 2040. You're expected to come in to semester 4 having this information in your back pocket. Okay, we're going to be expanding on this with advanced central perfusion topics in 2060 especially. Okay. We're going to explain the 5 steps used in interpretation of ECG strips, how to calculate heart rate, PR interval, QRS complex, and we're going to use that using a 6-second strip. And we're going to identify different types. All right. So the normal conduction of a healthy heart starts in the SA node, right? We have a stopgap presented in the AV node. So the information, the electrical circuit goes through and the impulse is generated in the SA node and gets delivered to the AV node. And then we have a little bit of a conduction slow on purpose so that the atria contract before the ventricles. Okay, and that happens at the junction right over in here, which is why some rhythms are called junctional rhythms. That's above your knowledge at this point, but if you ever hear that, that's why we call a junctional rhythm, because the impulse generates somewhere over here. Then they travel down the bundle of His and then splits off, okay? And then way down at the bottom, we have the Purkinje fibers. All right, electrical conduction system. The SA node has the fastest rate of automaticity. So every single cell in your heart has the ability to make its own electrical impulse. And then it likes to follow the leader, so to speak. So usually the fastest rate is the one that gets followed. So the SA node is the primary pacemaker of the heart, and its intrinsic rate, meaning its own natural rate, is 60 to 100 beats per minute. The AV node is the delay switch, which allows for sequential pumping of the atria first and then the ventricles. It can also take over as the pacemaker. Sorry about the spelling. If the SA node fails to fire, and its intrinsic rate is 40 to 60, so a little bit slower. Okay. The bundle of His, again, every cell in the heart can make its own pace. Which is why we get into problems later on when things take over that aren't supposed to be in control. So the intrinsic rate of the bundle of His is 40 to 60. And then the Purkinje fibers, if left, there's no other impulse being conducted, our ventricles can do things on their own. They don't do it very well, but their intrinsic rate is 20 to 40. So when we get into things later on in the semester, like the heart blocks, which you will be learning, those rates tend to be much slower because the Purkinje fibers only fire between 20 and 40 beats per minute. Okay. All right. So an electrocardiogram, an ECG, and it's a graphic representation of the electrical activity of the heart, and it's a printed. So it's what a machine interprets the rhythm of the heart to be. I like to think of it, each individual lead, looking at it like something like a map. I don't know if any of you have ever used those apps like Map My Walk or Map My Run, and you can actually see the path you took while you were on your walk or your run, and any little detours you took, and the actual length of time you were on your walk. Well, that's what an ECG really is. It shows the path the electricity took through your heart, how long it took to get there, and the pattern of that. So the repetition of those beats. All right. Breakdown. So we have a PR, the P wave, this pretty little, see how nice and rounded that is? We want our P waves upright and round on a lead 2. when we're learning to do ECG interpretation, all of you little duckies out there that are going to be going in and maybe working on a telefloor, when you're interpreting whether or not something's in sinus rhythm, you look at a lead 2, okay? And in a lead 2, our P wave, there should be a P wave before every QRS, and it's upright, perky, not to sound crass, but it should be like a nice, young, woman's bosom there. It should be upright and perky and round. It shouldn't be puckered. There shouldn't be any weird notches in it. Okay. And what this is the electrical signal going through the atria, right? And the atria are smaller than the ventricles, so it's a smaller wave. Like my map, my walk analogy, we know that, the basic size of an adult heart should fall within certain parameters. So that length of time that the electrical signal is traveling through the atria should be within a set period of time. It shouldn't take you 20 years to get somewhere if the heart's of a normal size and there's no detours and no blockages anywhere. So we look at a PR interval normal. So the beginning of the P wave to the beginning of the QRS over here, that's our PR interval. And we expect it to be 0.12 to 0.2, all right? And this is in seconds, so like very, very tiny bits of time, right? So for that electrical signal to kind of travel through the atria, take its trip through, we're mapping its walk, and it should take about that long for that signal to be completely conducted through the atria. All right. And then what happens? We have electrical, then mechanical. So in an ideal world where everything works, the atria is getting told to contract, the signal travels, and then the atria contract. Beautiful world, right? And it should only take that long for the actual signal to do its work, right? So we're mapping our walk still. And now we have a QRS. So the first downward deflected spike here is called the Q wave. And it does go down slightly, and then it goes up and it goes down. That's in a lead 2. Remember, we're looking at a lead 2. And so the top here is called our R wave. And when we do things like calculate heart rate, that's where we're looking. We're looking between R's, and we're going to be counting little boxes in between them. All right. Now, the ventricles are big, right? They're pretty darn big. So see how much larger this is than this? That's why. But we have a lot more fibers and a lot more conduction going on, so it shouldn't take too long for the information to travel through the ventricles. So we're looking, ideally, the entire QRS, we're looking at it to be less than 3 little boxes or less than 0.12. And in some textbooks, you see that less than 0.1 or 0.10. So we want a nice skinny QRS, right? Skinny. We don't want, I joke when I do this class in person, and I, talk about the Kardashians, and we want a Kendall. We want a supermodel skinny QRS. We don't want any Kims over here. No junk in the trunk. We want a nice skinny QRS. That means a nice healthy ventricles with no detours, no, aberrant, like have to double back. When we have some of the heart blocks, you'll see what we're talking about. All right. And then we have something over here, very important, the ST segment. Okay. And we look at this specifically, ST segment, when we start looking at things like myocardial infarction. And you have had this content before. And I want you to remember, it should be pretty isoelectric. The isoelectric line is the resting line over here. And an ST segment should be right around there. It shouldn't be above or below more than 1 block. And if we do have that, we have to start investigating. Maybe there's some kind of ischemia going on, or maybe we actually have a blockage. We have an MI, okay? And then we have a T wave. And this is the resting time for the ventricles. This is the absolute resting time of the ventricles. So I used to joke with my kids. So I work nights. A lot of nurses do for many years. And my kids knew that if I was down for a nap before I went into work, the house better be burning down before you woke me up. Okay, well, that's going on over here too. The ventricles do so much. They keep us alive our entire lives. And this is the one little these are, less than a second that these ventricles have time off. They're taking a nap. Do not bother the ventricles during this rest period. Okay, now the atria have a rest period too, but it gets hidden in this big wave over here. So the resting period for the atria get hidden in here. You don't see it, but we get to see the nice rest period for our ventricles in our T wave. If you ever hear something called an R on T phenomenon that leads to some kind of arrhythmia, that's when maybe an aberrant focus, like a nasty little cell that decides to fire off early, and it fires off during the resting period. Well, just like mama does, if you wake the ventricles up early, they get cranky, and you can end up in a lethal arrhythmia like a V-tach. Okay, so that's what this is, a no touchy. Rest period for the ventricles, no touchy. Okay, so we have a P wave, a QRS that's nice and skinny. We have a nice isoelectric ST segment, and then an upright T. In a lead 2, this is what it should look like. If you don't have this, then you need to do some more investigating. Okay, so in a lead 2, you don't have this pretty perfect picture with these measurements exactly how they are, 0.12 to 0.2. Less than 3 boxes, a nice isoelectric ST, and an upright T, we have a problem, okay? So we're going to look at the boxes themselves. So each of these little boxes is 0.04 seconds. And if you add up, you do the math, times 5. So each of the large boxes, so the little teeny boxes right here, each one of these, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, are 0.04 seconds. We try to make it easier to count, so we group them together in 5s, and that's 0.2. Okay? So I like to remind my students that the PR interval, it should be less than one large block. See how that works? Less than one large block from the QRS. All right? And this is in time. So if you count up 0.2 and you count up 0.2, 0.2, 0.2, 0.2, guess what? We have a second. Right? So we're actually looking at this over time. We're mapping our heart's electrical walk, so to speak, over time and where it goes. Okay? Okay, so breakdown. So we have a pretty little P wave, nice and pert, remember. The SA node fires, sends the electrical impulse outward to stimulate both atria and manifests as a P wave. All right, the actual wave itself is about 0.10, and I know we don't use a trailing zero. This is only for just to make it easier for you to see that we're looking at 0.1 or 0.10 seconds in length. The interval itself needs to be 0.12 to 0.2 seconds from the QRS. All right, and the interval is the time which it travels from the SA node to the atria and downward to the ventricles. All right, the QRS, we want a skinny, Kendall, no Kims here. Impulse from the bundle of His throughout the ventricular muscles, and this does measure less than 0.12 or less than 3 small squares on the ECG paper. So we want a nice skinny all the way, this whole thing, less than 3 boxes. Now, some textbooks will say 0.1, all right, but just err on the side of we want a skinny, right? We want a skinny little girl. All right, so if you're like, is that 0.10 or 0.12? As long as it's less than 0.12, you should have a nice skinny one. And then the T wave, and that's ventricular repolarization. That's mama's rest period. All right, no associated activity of the ventricular muscle. Resting phase, no touchy. Let mama sleep, okay? All right, so how do we interpret an ECG strip? We're going to look at the rate, the rhythm, the P wave, the PR interval, and the QRS complexes. All right, now, in a simple world, actually the simplest method is if you have a regular rhythm, meaning everything marches out, like boom, it's like a metronome. Like if you were going to play music to this, it would all, and you were clapping, you would clap on the beat, right? There's no like weird beat to this. It marches out. Okay. If you have a nice regular rhythm, look at the monitor and whatever number's on the monitor. Okay. If you're given a strip to interpret, most strips will tell you, little markers at the bottom will tell you where the 6 seconds are, right? And some, see the line's a little bit bolder here and over here at the ends. And then it also counts out the seconds for you. But remember, each one is 0.20 or 0.2. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's a second. So if there's no second marker, okay, if you count out all of the boxes and find yourself, all the way over here, if you count out boxes, you can figure out where the seconds are as well. So for every 5 boxes, large boxes, that's a second. Okay. So in a regular strip, if you have a 6-second marker on here, you count the R waves, the tippity top. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And then multiply that by 10. You have a rough idea that this rate is around 80. Pretty cool, huh? You cannot use that for an irregular heart rate. The only way, and I'm going to tell you this, the only way in vivo in a human being to calculate heart rate for someone with an irregular heart rate is to count an apical pulse for a full minute. Let me repeat that. The only way to actually count a heart rate in someone with an irregular heart rate is to count it. Put your stethoscope on their heart and count. People are like, oh, well, you know, the monitor's jumping all over the place and it says 75 to 110 and I'm just going to put in a range and average it. No, you're going to count it. The monitor's garbage. You cannot trust the rate on the monitor if they have an irregular heart rate. Okay, you got to count it out. Okay, so that's the simple way. Okay, the other way you can do this on the next slide, I think I have it, the more accurate way. So if you're actually taking an EKG test or ECG test, you're going to be tele-certified. You've got to do this the most accurate way. And so you're going to count all that teensy little boxes. So there's 5 in here, another 5, so 15. And then I'm going to say about 19 boxes. Okay? And so you take all the little boxes in between here, 19 boxes, and you divide that number into 1,500. All right? So 1,500 divided by 19 equals 79. Now, a lot of you are like, Professor Constance, you're being really nitpicky here. Well, in some hospitals, they are very nitpicky on these exams. So if you want the most accurate method, use that. But again, if we did our cheaters method, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, we get a ballpark of 80, which is pretty darn close, right? But you will see that this is the most accurate way. All right. Again, in a regular rhythm, we're also looking at the monitor, which would conveniently be reading 79 beats per minute. All right. But that's how we calculate rate. So remember, 5 big boxes equals second. If we have a 6-second strip and it's regular, you just count the QRSs and multiply by 10. All right. All right. So let's figure out our heart rate. Okay. So let's figure out if we have a 6-second strip here. All right. Probably because we have these little doodads at the bottom. Sorry, my mouse finger is getting cold. I'm in an air-conditioned room. Okay, so we have 6-second strip here. But if you ever want to confirm that, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, that's 3 seconds right there. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So heart rate's about what? 100? That's about right to me. Okay. So rhythms are classified as regular or irregular. All right. We can calculate the heart rhythm and establish a pattern of QRS complexes, right? So we're going to measure the ventricular rhythm by measuring the interval between the R to R waves and the atrial rhythm by measuring the P to P waves. So they don't always mean the same. If you have something other than normal sinus rhythm or sinus tach, the P to P and the R to R might be different. And when we go over heart blocks this semester, you'll see what I'm talking about. All right. If there's a variation greater than 0.06 seconds, the rate is irregular. All right, so we're going to be measuring the R to Rs. And a slight difference is okay, but they should be pretty darn regular to be considered regular. All right, so the P wave. Again, we are looking at a lead 2. Lead 2. All right, so 5 questions. Are there P waves present? Are they occurring regularly? Is there a P wave for each QRS complex? And are they smooth, rounded, and upright in appearance, or are they inverted? So we don't want to, just like my, perfect bosom analogy, we want them upright, round. We don't want any saggies in there, right? We want them all nice and upright. And do they all look similar? They should look, if the impulse is coming from the same place, they should look the same, like a little cookie cutter, okay? All right, so PR interval, the normal length of the PR interval from the time of the start of the P wave to the beginning of our QRS is 0.12 to 0.2. Again, I know we don't use trailing zeros, but this is just for sake of you learning this number. So 3 to 5 small squares. All right, so 3 questions to ask yourself. Is the PR interval greater than 0.2? So is it bigger than a large box? If it is, we do not have sinus rhythm. Well, we don't have perfect sinus rhythm. Okay. Are the PR intervals less than 0.12? Remember, we're mapping our walk, so to speak. So we know a set distance. The PR interval should be between 0.12 and 0.2. If it's a shorter interval, then that means that impulse didn't come from the SA node. It came from somewhere else. We're diagnosing sinus rhythm from the SA node. All right. And are the PR intervals constant across the ECG strip? They should be constant. All right. Now we're going to ask questions about the QRS complex. Are they too wide? Do we have Kims instead of Kendalls? Are the intervals greater than 0.12 or 3 small boxes? So if so, the complex may have come from the ventricle. So, and again, some texts use 0.10. All right. If they're less than 0.12, that's skinny. We want skinny girls, so we want Kendalls. And if so, the complex is most likely supraventricular in the atrial origin. Whoa, what the hell does that mean? Okay, so if the electrical impulse started above the ventricles, meaning in the atria, it's some kind of atrial rhythm like sinus rhythm or atrial fibrillation, then the QRS intervals, the length of the QRS should be 0.12 or less. We should have a skinny, all right? Because atrial conducted beats have skinny QRSs in a healthy heart, all right? So and if they're wider than that, then that means the ventricle had to do something for itself. And when the ventricle has to start the electrical conduction on its own, we have a wider QRS. That's why we measure all this stuff in the first place, all right? And are the QRS complexes similar in appearance across the strip? Okay. What is artifact? It's static, right? Maybe the lead's not in the right place. Maybe he's got his cell phone sitting on top of his, or the remote control. We need a better picture. All right. These pictures, mapping our walk only works when the leads are in the right place, the patient's relatively still, right? And there's no other electrical interference going on. Remember, this is electrical signals we're measuring, and they're very small amounts of electricity. So, they're using their laptop or they're sitting near the remote. All that can cause a fuzzy picture, and that's artifact. All right. So normal sinus rhythm. The rate is between 60 and 100 beats per minute. The P wave is upright and pretty and perky, is positively deflected. It's above, goes up. positively deflected in lead 2 and is from 0.12 to 0.2 seconds from the QRS complex. The rate is regular. There is a QRS following every P wave. We have no lonely P's and no lonely QRS's. There is a P wave before every QRS, and the QRS is less than 0.12 seconds. So skinny. We want skinny Kendalls here. And that means it originates in the SA node. Okay, normal sinus rhythm. So if you have all of those things, a nice regular rhythm, the rate's between 60 and 100. We have an upright, pretty perky P wave that's 0.12 to 0.20 seconds from the QRS complex. The rate is regular, and following every P wave, there is a nice skinny QRS. We have a sinus rhythm, normal sinus rhythm. Okay. Sinus bradycardia means we've met all of the criteria except the rate is 40 to 60, 40 to 59. Let's say, put it that way. All right. Sinus tach meets all the above criteria except the rate is 100 to 160. Now, in American Heart, I believe they use 150. So if the rate's 150 or below, then we're going to consider that a sinus tach. Above 150 gets a little murky anyway. Okay. Some textbooks use different numbers. All right. So let's look at our normal sinus rhythm here. So the rate is the rate between 60 and 100. So we have a 6-second strip here, and we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So roughly 70 beats per minute. So we could also count all the little boxes and do the math out. All right. Is the rate between 60 and 100? Check. What is the rhythm? Is it regular? Are they all about the same distance apart? And the answer to that is yes. So if we were going to clap, 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 that would follow a nice rhythm. If we were listening to the patient's heart, it would fall on the beat. It would be right where we expected it. Okay, so it's regular. Is there a pretty perky upright P wave before every QRS? So pretty little perky upright P before every QRS, and they're upright and uniform. They pretty much look the same, right? We want them to look all the same, and they do. Is the PR interval within our defined parameters, right? 3 to 5 small squares. So are we less than one large block? So the easiest way is to look for one that falls within the block, and the answer to that is yes. We're within one large block. Do all the QRS complexes look alike? They should. Oh, look at that. Pretty, pretty. We have Kendalls here. There's no junk in this trunk, right? And is the length of the QRS complex less than 3 small boxes? Abso-freaking-lutely, right? We have a nice skinny, right? Nice skinny Kendall. No Kims here. So if the answer to that is if you answer yes and you follow that, then we indeed have normal sinus rhythm. And this is in a lead 2. Following me, lead 2. Sinus Brady. Okay, so we count. And we're going to eyeball this, and we're going to say the heart rate's around 40. Right? Is it less than 60? Yeah, it's less than 60. Is it regular? Yeah. If we were to measure this out, it would be nice and regular. Is there a P wave before every QRS? Same. Oh, yep. Nice, upright, pretty perky. No saggies here. We got nice, pretty P waves. And are they upright and uniform? Yes. Now, our measurements stay the same over here. So, still has to be less than one large block. And are we? Yes. All right. It's got to be less than one large block away from the QRS. And we are. Okay. Do all the QRS complexes look alike? Yes. Absolutely. And they're nice and upright here. See, up and down. And are they less than 0.12? Yes. The QRS is less than 0.12. So we have nice little skinny Kendalls. All right. And because of that, we've met all of our criteria. Then this is sinus bradycardia. All right. Sinus tach. This textbook used 160. I'm pretty sure your American Heart uses 150. So I'd like you to use 150, I believe. So we're looking at, is this nice and regular? Yep, nice and regular. We measured this all out. So if you were going to count this out, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So we're looking at a heart rate of 120-ish, right? And it's regular. And there's a pretty upright P wave before every single QRS, right? And they're all upright. They all look about the same. The PR interval is within normal parameters, 0.12 to 0.2, right? The QRSs all look identical. They're all upright and pretty and skinny, right? We want skinny, 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 skinny. Then if we hit all those criteria, it is sinus tach, okay? Now we're going to look at atrial rhythms. Now, the one thing about atrial rhythms, usually, and I say this usually, in practice, you get some really sick individuals with lots of other complicated heart stuff going on. But usually atrial rhythms, you have a skinny QRS. So we have Kendall's usually and not Kim's. Now, it doesn't mean always. You can have an atrial fibrillation with some wider QRSs, but that's pretty much above your pay grade. But atrial flutter, atrial fibrillation, and then supraventricular tachycardia, which is kind of a catch-all. To be honest, technically, all of these are supraventricular tachycardias, or can be supraventricular tachycardias if the rate is high enough. But supraventricular tachycardia just means that it's a tachycardia from the atria, not a sinus rhythm, but it's caused from some aberrant impulse, some rogue cell that got, sneaky, and it's firing off impulses, but it's from an atria, okay? And that means you end up with narrow QRS complex. You end up with Kendall's, little skinnies, all right? So the SA node, for whatever reason, fails to generate an impulse, so another atrial focus takes over. All right, so since the impulse is initiated in the atria, supraventricular just means above the ventricle. So the QRS usually appears normal. We usually have a nice skinny Kendall, okay? So normally things happen over here, but this, I don't know, got sick, or this one decided to start firing faster or whatever. Remember, automaticity, so they all follow the leader. So whoever starts firing the fastest wins, and in this case, it's not the SA node, okay? So we can have something called an atrial flutter. So this is when we're like, what the hell is this? Oh no. So we call this the sawtooth pattern. If you were to look at the side of a saw, like a hacksaw, you were going to cut down, I don't know, branches in your backyard. It kind of looks almost like the sawtooth pattern. It doesn't look normal, right? You're like, what the heck is this? So what's happening is the atria are like spinning out of control. And then the ventricular response can be variable. And here it's regular, but sometimes you can have it 2 of these and then a beat and then 3. So sometimes it shows up in a pattern, but it can be variable. So the atrial rhythm is regular. The atria are actually firing at about 300 beats per minute, which isn't actually very good for you. We don't have normal P waves. We got the sawtooth pattern going on. So because we don't have normal P waves, we don't have a measurable PR interval. The QRSs, because it's supraventricular, it tells you right here, it's atrial, that the QRSs are skinny. So we have Kendall, so we know the ventricles aren't doing this. It's something from the atria. So usually we have nice skinny Kendalls. I say usually. You can have some sick hearts out there that get really complicated, and when we're in doubt, we have expert consultation. We ask, cardiologists, what the heck are we looking at? So whenever you see this sawtooth pattern, it can be regular or regularly irregular, like a pattern. So sometimes you can have 2 and then 3 and 2 and then 3. Usually what happens with this though, this is a textbook version of atrial flutter. Usually it's so fast, the ventricular response is so fast that you can't tell. And so sometimes we show this as a demonstration, but in real life, often atrial flutter doesn't look, it's so fast that you really can't tell what it is, and it looks just like an SVT, which we'll go over in another slide. So atrial fibrillation. This is when the atria are fibrillating and just like schmutz. So when I see people trying to figure out, do I see a P wave? If you're scrimping and scrounging, go, oh, maybe that's a P. If you have to do that, you don't have a P. P waves stand out. They're beautiful. They're upright. They're rounded. The other dead giveaway with atrial fibrillation is how irregularly irregular it means. It just comes haphazard. This R to R is different than this R to R, and this R to R is different. It's all over the place. So we don't have normal P waves. You can't go, I think that's a P. No. So no discernible, like if I have to guess that I have a P wave, I don't have a P wave. Period. We just have fibrillatory lines here, just schmutz, all right? But it is an atrial rhythm. So usually, and I say usually, we have nice, narrow, skinny Kendalls, okay? They're pretty, pretty thin, all right? But there's no discernible PR interval. It's irregular. We don't have pretty little P waves. But usually the QRS complexes are less than 0.12. But, so if you have skinny Kendalls, irregular rate, and no discernible Ps, you have atrial fibrillation. Okay? Period. All right, supraventricular tachycardia. So this is a fast rate. And this is when I was talking, remember on the atrial flutter slide, I said, usually this is what a flutter can look like, and we can't tell the difference what it is because it's too darn fast. All the waves are merging together into one. So it's above 150. It is regular, however. The distance between these two are regular. If we were going to count this out, it's up there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 20. Whoa, right? 250. Woo, right? But it is regular. All right, now here's where it gets tricky. Is there a P wave before every QRS? How the hell are we supposed to know? They're all smushed together. You can't tell. You can't discern the PR interval. It's too fast. But we should have skinny Kendalls here, right? To call it an SVT, supraventricular, meaning the impulse came from above the ventricles, we usually have skinny QRSs. That's how we can call this a supraventricular tachycardia and not a ventricular tachycardia. The ventricular tachycardias are fat. All right, so we have skinnies. So what do we do here? When we go over the algorithms in class, you're going to see that we do things to slow this down. Sometimes it's a diagnostic approach. If we slow it down long enough, we can see what's going on. All right, so more on SVT. So SVT is sometimes caused by an impulse re-entering or doubling back. It's like circles around, and then the ventricles eventually have a response in a regular pattern. Remember, we are losing major cardiac output with this, right? There's not enough fill time. When you have a heart beating faster than 150, you lose fill time, and so we're going to have usually a symptomatic patient. All right, so here's our reentry. So somewhere in the atria, because we have a skinny Kendall, we have a skinny QRS, we have this unfortunate electrical mess going around and round and round and round and round, and then we end up with a fast heart rate. So sometimes we'll shock this or give it meds. That's for another class. Okay. Ventricular rhythms. So if the atria fail to generate an impulse, or if the ventricles become irritable, the the ventricles will take over control of pacing the heart. Remember, every cell in the heart has the ability to do this. These impulses can come from anywhere in the ventricle, including the bundle branches or the Purkinje fibers. Okay? So we have a premature ventricular contraction. Now, these are pretty normal, right? Most of us sitting have multiple ones per minute. It's not a big deal. Ventricular tachycardia, RUT-RO, torsades de pointes, RUT-RO, and ventricular fibrillation, code blue, right? Okay, so PVCs. So we're going to identify the underlying rhythm, and then we're like, we have this hot mess. So let's start at the beginning of the strip. It's not regular. I'm like, oh, crap, what's going on here? Oh, man, Professor Costa. All right, so let's look for a set by itself without this, whatever you want to call it over here. So we've got a couple of beats in a row that look pretty darn good. So we have pretty regular rhythm over here. We have a P wave. Okay, that's all right. We have some skinny Kendalls. Okay. Oh, we got something going on. And you astute students are like, what's going on with the ST segment over here? And that would require some, follow-up. We're like, ST segment. But we do have an upright T wave, or maybe it's flipped over. It's hard to tell on this strip. It could be an inverted T, which is a problem sign, or it could be ST depression, which is a problem sign. But that's not where we're here. We're identifying a rhythm. So we have most of the criteria. It's probably a sinus rhythm, but we got something going on. So a PVC is a ventricular contraction, premature, meaning it happened before it was supposed to. It wasn't following the leader, and it happened early. And the other thing that's bad about these particular PVCs, because they look wide and bizarre, these are definitely wider than our skinny Kendalls over here. We got Kims. We got some junk in our trunk. This is way wider than this, okay? So this is a ventricular contraction. It came from the ventricle, all right? Junk in the trunk, all right? It's wide and bizarre. And the other problem is, see how it's somewhere falling on our mama nap time, on our T wave. Mama's sleeping over here, and we have a PVC. This is a problematic PVC. If you see something like this happening, we've got some irritability going on. This patient would definitely be on a monitor, and we also have, some ST things going on. This could be someone who's got some ischemia or a sick heart, so this bears watching, okay? But for rhythm identification, we would probably call this a normal sinus rhythm with PVCs. And then when we're identifying PVCs, we're going to call them unifocal or multifocal. Whoa, what does that mean? Do they look the same? Are they coming from the same place? Do we have the same problematic cell in the ventricle causing this problem? And chances are yes, because this looks an awful lot like that. So this PVC looks like this PVC, and so we're calling them unifocal. If they look different from one another, then we would call them multifocal. So sometimes you have an upright PVC and sometimes you have a downward PVC, and those just mean they're coming from different places. All right. In general, PVCs are benign. They don't cause any problems. It's only when patients become symptomatic or start saying that they're feeling things that we worry about it. V-tach, code blue, right? So it's very fast, right? So it's a tachycardia. Now, here's the thing. People are like, I can never tell V-fib from V-tach. V-tach, they look the same. All right. We have no P waves because it's a ventricular beat. We have cookie cutter. They all look, one looks exactly the same as the next, and they're wide. All right. We have Kims, no Kendalls. These are wide QRSs. So fat QRSs, regular, fast. That's a V-tach. Now, you could either be alive or not alive with this. So we're going to check for a pulse, right? This is a shockable rhythm. So if we do not have a pulse, we're going to shock this when we go over this in class. So this is bad. We don't like this rhythm. If they're not, if they're still alive, chances are they may not stay that way very long. Okay, but remember, VTach is regular. All right, the R waves are all equally far apart from one another. They're all wide and they all look the same. Torsades de pointes, or twisting of the points, is a regular. If you were to judge the distance, it's regular, but the amplitude, how high up they go, changes. And it looks like you're actually twisting it on itself, almost like a DNA molecule. And this is a type of VTach. And it's the only times I've ever seen this is with alcoholics. It's usually low magnesium. And I've only seen it in practice with a living person once. So the person was going in and out of this. I actually had clinical students. This was at the Miriam, and I was like, oh my God, come over. You have to look at this. But it's twisting of the points. But remember, the distance, the R to R, stays the same. And you definitely have a waveform. Okay, and it forms it looks like a pattern. Cold blue. All right, V-fib. This is the one students have a hard time with. There's no rhyme nor reason. It's all over the place. There's no like set distance between these things. They don't look like a cookie cutter version of each other. It's all schmutz. It's like a 5-year-old scribbled a line, or me trying to draw a straight line. And we can have fine or coarse, meaning this one's bumpier than this one. That's all. There's no rhythm. It's just, there's no heartbeat. You're going to check for a pulse on this. Chances are the patient's dead, and we're doing compressions and we're doing shock. Okay, so this is V-fib, but it looks like a scribbled line. All right, VTach does not. V-fib does. All right, so asystole is a straight line. All right, there's no electrical activity. We also want to check and make sure the leads are on the patient. That would be nice. And so it's a straight line. That means asystole. All right, no electrical activity going on here. Down at the bottom, we have something called pulseless electrical activity, and that's the scary one, because you can still have a normal conduction system, but no mechanical activity, no heartbeat. So PEA is scary because you look at the monitor and you go, oh, they're in sinus rhythm, and then you check a pulse and they're dead. So it's important to check when in doubt. So if your patient looks dead, even though the monitor says they're in normal sinus rhythm, just check a pulse. All right, quiz time. All right, so at the top, this one is our pretty textbook torsades de points, right? The R to R's are the same if you were to count them out, but the amplitude changes, and that's a torsades de points, okay? Down here, this one's tricky. Sorry, made it tricky on purpose. But this would be, see how this is like slanty? That's not a pretty P wave. Chances are this is a atrial flutter, 2-to-1 atrial flutter, okay? Because it looks so sawtoothy over here. See how it looks like a sawtooth? All right, that was a hard one. I wouldn't put like that on a test, but up here, let's look at our rate. So chances are this one, we have a pretty upright perky P wave, a nice skinny Kendall, and that's a nice upright T wave. There's no ST segment problem going on. That's a sinus rhythm, normal sinus, right? Down here, we have a nice upright P wave, a nice skinny QRS. We do have an upright T. It's kind of far away. That's for another class. And our rate's about, well, let's count it out, because that seems awfully far away to me, right? So, so let's count all these little boxes, right? So 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 43, right? And if we were going to do, I haven't done this ahead of time, right? So 1,500 divided by around 43, it's lower, right? That's lower than 40. So you're like, huh. So if it's lower than 40, you technically cannot call this a sinus bradycardia. Don't get tripped up. All right, don't go, oh, there's 4, and that's probably, Professor Koss is probably being nice to me. It has to meet our strict criteria. So if the rate is less than 40, it is not a sinus Brady. It's something else. Okay? We can't technically call it a sinus Brady if it's below 40. And this is. So it meets all the other criteria, but there's probably something else going on with this. All right. Now, we're hunting. I'm hunting wabbits. No, I'm hunting for P waves. If I have to hunt, I don't have any. Right? Okay, so I'm hunting. There's no P waves. Is this regular or irregular? It's pretty freaking irregular to me. And, okay. I hate it when this happens. You're like, oh, but I'm supposed to look. Okay, if we don't have upright, okay, we know that this heart's sick because we don't have P waves and we don't have a regular rhythm. All right, so now we got to put our thinking caps on. They're probably less than 0.12. So we have skinny Kendalls. So if we have irregular skinny Kendalls with no discernible P waves, we have AFib, atrial fibrillation. And that's what we have here. And I know, it's ugly. AFib is ugly. Yuck, hate it. It doesn't do the person any good either. We lose that atrial pumping, so we lose some of our cardiac output. But there are grandmas walking around, no problem at Stop and Shop with this rhythm and doing fine with it. We just make sure we anticoagulate them so they don't have a stroke. Okay, so let's look at this one. This one I was nice enough to put the 6-second strip on here. So we're going to 1 second, 2 second, 3 second, 4 second, 5 second. And so, so we have 6-second strip and we're going to count them across. And we're like, okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. Okay, so we have a heart rate of around 170-ish, or definitely above 150. Okay, and you get tempted. You're like, oh, well, I have a P wave. I have a pretty little upright P wave, and I have a skinny QRS, and I have a T wave. And you're like, well, that means it's sinus. Don't go there. It is above 150, all right? And for our intents and purposes, if it's above 150, we're going to call that a supraventricular tachycardia. Remember, don't get caught up in that. If it's above 150 and we have skinny Kendalls and it's regular, we're going to call that an SVT, okay? Remember, we're losing filling time here. There's nothing normal sinus about this if it's going this fast. All right. Ruh-roh. Okay. So they're fat. No matter what you can say, we've got Kims here, right? And it looks regular, right? Or even if you went through the bottom. So we got junk in the trunk. We have a regular rhythm, and it looks pretty darn fast. So we have VTAC. Ventricular tachycardia. See how nice and cookie cutter that is? No, I don't want to see this. I don't want this on my patient, but for diagnostic purposes, it's easy to tell. Down here, you're like, ugh, there's no, it's all schmutzy. It's, this, see how the amplitude changes, and now we have some, this is not a VTAC. This is a VFib. Okay? All right, now we're looking at our P wave, QRS, T, and whoa, what the hell is that? Remember, wide and bizarre, junk in the trunk. This is a PVC. Premature, came early because we were expecting it to come somewhere over here, and it didn't. It came early, so it's premature. We got some junk in the trunk. And it's wide and bizarre. It doesn't look like anything we expect. That's a premature ventricular contraction. Okay. Now, let's look at this nice 6-second strip down here. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So 120. Okay. Looks pretty regular to me. We have a pretty perky, upright P wave. It's a little pointy, but not backwards slanting or anything. We have nice little skinny Kendalls, less than a size 12, skinny girl, right? And we have a nice upright T, and there's nothing going on in our ST. So this is a sinus tach.